Chapter 18 concludes our reading material for Unit 5, and Unit 5 is the first of two really busy units for us. Unit 6 will also cover three chapters, chapters 8, 15, and 16, and Unit 5 has covered three chapters. This is our last chapter for Unit 5, and here we're looking at the second chapter that's really linked to our marketing plan in Chapter 7. And that is the chapter on global business or global opportunities for small business. So let's look at this just for a little bit and see what it has to offer us. Well, here's some definitions for you. Globalization is the expansion of international business. And you see this happening everywhere for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is that we see trade barriers being renegotiated. They're coming down across the globe. It's becoming ever more easy for us to communicate globally. We're seeing banks that are linked together globally, and so financial activities can be linked globally. And so it's just the whole conditions that we need to do business are improving from the standpoint of global business opportunities. And so that given, then, many of our small companies that are formed now are formed with globalization in mind, with international cross-border business activities in mind from day one. It's pretty common now. I would encourage anybody starting a company to be thinking about international business from day one. And there's a lot of things to think about when it comes to international business. And here's just the beginning of it in Exhibit 18.1. These are some questions you need to think about, and this is an excellent list of questions. I'm just going to hit on a couple of these. You have to, as a manager or owner of a company, you have to stand back and say, why do I want to go global? Why do I want to do international business? And secondly, am I really committed to it? And we'll address that question some more in just a little bit, but that's a big key question. Then I have to look at, do I have the expertise to really manage a global operation? What kind of partners will I have to have in the other countries and so forth? And then I have to look at my capacity. Do I have the capacity to support a global market, a market that could be as large or larger than the market I'm playing in now? Do I have the financial capability? And just on and on. So these are all very good questions that you need to ask yourself before you decide that you want to go international in your business. So here's some to-dos that you need to think about. You got to decide up front, are you up to the task of globalization? We'll talk about that some more in just a moment. You need to study different cultural environments and trading systems and what their political and business practices are, and there's a jillion things to look at from that standpoint. Take a look at the NAFTA agreement, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Take a look at the European Union, what kind of agreements do we have there, what countries are involved, what does the market really look like for you there. And so you've got to have a market attitude, a market, just like you would do here if you were going to do it domestically. Internationally, you've got to have the same attitude. What does the market look like? Who's going to buy my product, and how much will they pay for it? Now, the other thing you got to do is you got to be prepared to modify products to meet design specifications that vary from country to country. So we've got a typo here. If you see it's from county to country, it should be from country to country. If I were doing a normal lecture, I'd stop right here and fix that, but I'm not. So let's just keep going. Now, back to this modifying products. If you're an automobile manufacturer, you have to just about go nuts trying to figure out what do you have to do to sell the same product in 3 foreign countries: California, European Union, India. What are the different requirements that you might have to have placed on you in order just to get the same product into those different foreign countries? By the way, a little tongue-in-cheek there on California. Sometimes they look like a foreign country. Here's a really good chart right here on what are the forces that drive global enterprises. And we're going to look at the traditional motivation for moving into global markets and the current motivation for moving into global markets. So let's look at them. In expanding markets, the traditional motivation was, I'm going to try to extend my product life cycle. And I'm going to give you a good example of this. This is one that's in the press big time right now. The U.S. Defense Department is getting a lot of flack because they're shipping F-16s to Egypt. And I can understand both the pros and the cons of that. But let's look at what is that product they're shipping. The product is a product that the U.S. military no longer uses. They're still flying them to some extent, but it's not the plane that they're really counting on. So this is a product extension effort that Lockheed Martin is going to try to sell more of a plane they've been producing for years and years and years. Now, the emerging motivation on expanding markets is I'm going to find buyers for highly specialized products. That's this example of the F-16 I'm talking about. Another one is I want to gain access to resources. The traditional motivation there was I want to find raw materials. The emerging motivation is I want to obtain human resources. Let's look at an example there. Prior to about 2000, and maybe a little bit past that, if I went to any third world country, we'll call it, I would find there not major U.S. companies, but major Japanese trading companies. And I encountered this years ago, just as the Iron Curtain was coming down, and we could begin to get access to Russia. After the Soviet Union had collapsed, so we began to get access to Russia. I went to I did a little research. We were trying to propose some business for the Russian government and with our company, and so I went to Russia, and I discovered that the Japanese trading companies had been there long before the Iron Curtain ever came down. And then I discovered that if I go over to South America, to Brazil, I will find the Japanese trading companies. If I go to Australia, I will find the Japanese trading companies. So I asked myself the question, why is that? Well, the reason why was Japan in and of itself has very little, if any at all, natural resources. So all of the things they have to grow their economy and to sustain their economy has to be procured from other countries, other geographic areas. And so they took these huge Japanese trading companies and located them with the help of the government in other countries to set up trade agreements and other types of business agreements in order to gain access to natural resources that were very, very much needed. Example, Australia. Much of the coal that is mined in Australia is shipped to Japan to be used. That's where the Japanese get most of their coal. So that was the traditional motivation. In today's world, the motivation is to get human resources. I'll give you an example a little bit later on about Boeing aircraft and in the design of their Dreamliner, what they did in order to capitalize not only on efficiency, but on human resources in designing that very, very complicated high-tech airplane. So let's look at cutting cost. The traditional motivation there was to reduce labor and transportation costs. The emerging motivation is I want to get around tariff reduction. I want to obtain tariff reductions. Why do you think the Japanese automakers are building manufacturing plants in the U.S.? They're protecting their interests from a tariff standpoint. What happens if all the tariffs change tomorrow? Well, if I don't have a manufacturing plant in the U.S., I may be caught. And so the Japanese are being very shrewd. They're building manufacturing plants in the U.S. to protect themselves in case there's some tariff changes that should occur. Capitalizing on special features of location. Traditionally that was to profit from unique local features such as the Italian artisan's flair for design. If I go to Milan, Italy, you see all the major design houses there. Classically, that was a place to be if you were a design house. The emerging motivation on special features is to follow large client firms that locate abroad. I'll give you another example here on this one. Had a good chance to visit the Jaguar production plant in Coventry, England, at the time that Jaguar was owned by Ford. And I had a chance to go through that plant, very impressed with it, have always loved the Jaguar cars and the designs, and was very impressed with their fairly small, by comparable means, manufacturing plant. And I noticed that right across the street was Lear, a factory for Lear that was producing leather upholstery and leather seats for automobiles. So here's a case where Jaguar was producing fancy new luxury cars, and Lear just located their plant across the street that built the seats that go into the Jaguars. And so their shipping costs are very low. They could literally do just-in-time delivery of their product, and they supported the Jaguar manufacturing scheme that way. And so here's a scheme where emerging motivation was to be close to a client who was abroad in order to keep that business that I wanted so desperately for my company. So this is a really good chart here to show you why people decide to make their businesses international or global in nature. Here's another reason. There's some very, very large markets that are emerging right now. This is 2005 data, and you can kind of see some numbers that are very impressive. BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So the BRIC markets. The BRIC markets account for 6.7 trillion people. These numbers here are in millions. So 6,775 million. So 6.8 billion people in the world in those 4 countries. Their wealth per capita is $8,728. That's the GNI per capita, gross national income per capita, so per person. Now let's look at the growth there in some of those numbers. If I look at the growth in economic growth, the GDP growth for those countries in 2006 2007, I see that where's the major growth occurring? In the 2 most populous of those countries, China and India. Their economic growth was 9.1% in 2006 and 2007. I want you to notice also that in China and India are 2 of our lowest per capita wealth countries. And so there's a lot of growth opportunities there. As those countries mature economically, and as they become more of a regular player in the world economy, you're going to see that wealth per capita, GNI per capita of gross national income increase in those countries. In fact, it's already happening in China. There will be a point coming before too long where China can no longer compete from a cost standpoint, from a manufacturing standpoint, because their standard of living will get to the point where they can't compete with some of the other countries. And then it's not so easy or not so advantageous to move all your manufacturing capability from the U.S. to China, say. But these are just some numbers that are very impressive. Lots of people in those countries, lots of market growth there yet to come. So here's what you want to do when you're going to expand your market. You want to make the most of your experience. You want to try to take what you do best and move it overseas and get some cost savings out of it. You want to take that experience and learn how to do it better as you build new plants and as you develop new people. And you want to get the benefit of the economies of scale, the efficiencies that come from the expansion of production. So those are some things you got to think about in the expanding market situation. In the global strategy options, you've got several of those. Let's just look at a couple of these right quickly. I'm just starting with exporting, going clockwise. You can export, you can import, you can do foreign licensing, you can do international franchising or international strategic alliances, or you can locate facilities abroad. Exporting, importing, I think you're probably pretty aware of that. Foreign licensing is when I license my technology or my product capability to a country overseas. International franchising is just like national franchising or domestic franchising. I set up franchise agreements abroad, and a lot of the major fast food companies in the U.S. have already done that. McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King. Some of the best hamburgers in England are sold by Burger King franchises in England. So that's international franchising. And then international strategic alliances is probably the approach that I like best when you're first trying to break into an international market. And the beauty of the international strategic alliance is that it lines you up with a partner in the country who understands the culture, who understands who the players are, and who can make your operation get started more quickly than it might otherwise can help you to cut through the governmental red tape that almost certainly exists in every international company. The U.S. is trying desperately to catch up bureaucratic-wise and red tape-wise, and I hope we don't catch up, but they're trying really hard to do that with some of the other countries that just stifle you from a paperwork and bureaucracy standpoint. So having a local partner in business can really help you there. Another thing that we see a lot of is locating facilities abroad, primarily in the manufacturing situation where a company is trying to get some advantage from a cost standpoint in manufacturing. So they move to a low labor rate market to build their products. And you see this happening a lot around the country. So in exporting, we're just selling products produced in home country to customers in another country. It's kind of a cheap way to expand your international markets. And the ease of selling on the web, which I was going to point this out a little bit later, but I'll point it out right now. The web is changing the whole way that we do business, particularly from consumer activity internationally, because I can now buy from stores located outside this country on the web. In fact, I've done that before. I bought some goods that I was going to need while I was in England for a while, and I went ahead and bought those on the web from British companies and had them drop shipped to where I was going to be, so that they were waiting for me when I got there. Didn't have to haul them around in airports and on airplanes. Here's some of the problems with exporting. Language barriers are always an issue. International shipping is an issue. I'll come back to that in a moment. Product modification means I'm taking a standard product that I sell, say, widely in the U.S., and now I've got to change it in order to sell it in one of these foreign countries like California. This happens everywhere. So the governmental regulations and relationships are very, very important. And then, of course, currency exchange rates play big time into your cost structure and your profit margins. That you have to continually monitor the currency exchange rates when you're doing business overseas, so that you can preserve your margins. Let's talk about international shipping just for a moment. I learned the hard way that if I'm going to ship products and systems from the U.S. to another country, I've got to be smart in how I ship them. I was shipping a large system one time from the U.S. to Germany, and I was shipping it through a domestic carrier here in the U.S. and landing it in Frankfurt, trying to work it through customs. And I was finding out that I couldn't get my product through customs very rapidly, and it was just almost impossible to work with the bureaucracy. So I got to thinking about it, and I hired a guy who was assigned to stay at the Frankfurt airport and literally walk our systems through as they landed. And secondly, I used the German domestic carrier, not the U.S. domestic carrier, to ship my product. Lo and behold, I had no more problems in getting products through customs. It just worked as smoothly as you could possibly imagine. So what I'm saying here is that you've got to learn what the tricks of the trade are. What are the tricks to getting stuff through other companies, other countries, governmental regulations and barriers that literally pop up everywhere. Importing is it's self-explanatory. It's where I'm selling goods that I'm buying in another country and bringing them to the U.S. to sell them. So I've got to find really good sources of products. That's the first key that I've got to have in order to be a good importer. And then I've got to be importing products that I know people want. I was talking to a guy just a few weeks ago who's been very successful in doing this. He's continually importing products from overseas into this country. But the key to his business is he's already developed shelf space in various outlets for his products, so that when he gets here, he already knows what shelf it's going to go to and what company is going to take it. So you have to have a kind of a global sourcing strategy. You've got to have a broad strategy on where your sources for product are going to be and what that product needs to be. And so I have to set up those distribution channels, those shippers, those suppliers. How do I get a product from point A to point B here in the U.S.? It's just as difficult as getting a product from point B to point A in another country. Foreign licensing is another way I can do business. This is where I simply license with other companies to build my product or provide my service. I'm the licensor. The international company, the foreign company, becomes the licensee. Here's the problem with that. The bottom bullet down, the counterfeit activity. I've actually witnessed a situation where I work in a partnership with a company overseas. I license my product to them to use, and lo and behold, within a few years, there's a product suddenly appears on the market, high-tech product, very complicated, that exactly looks like my product that this company has copied. And so I'm in a bind at that point in time. I've seen, in fact, our company lost some business because of that. Now, the royalties and our fees that your licensee will pay you, that's what they pay for the privilege of being able to use your product or your design. Pretty standard type deal here, except you're dealing in international markets. And I will also tell you that in the license agreement, you got, and as equally true in other types of business agreements overseas, you want, if you're in the U.S., you want to write into your contracts and into your agreements that the agreement will operate under the laws of the United States, and that any disagreements will be handled in the court system of the United States. You want to make sure those terms basically are in any agreement that you sign with a foreign company, so that if there is a disagreement and you do have to go to litigation, that litigation will occur in the United States under U.S. law. So here's a couple of other strategies. International franchising. This is typical, just like domestic franchising, same pros and cons. And I can have the international strategic alliances. This is the one that I really like here. This is where I team up with people in country that I trust to do business in country. And this is the easiest to do. And you're buying cultural understanding, language understanding, all the tricks of how you try to get into local markets. So at least initially, you try to get you an international strategic alliance that you think might be able to work. Not always easy to do. You have to be very, very careful about people who are going to cheat you out of your designs, out of your product, out of your money. And so it's something you have to work at over a period of time and develop relationships within that country that can point you to quality strategic alliances. You can also locate your facility abroad. There's a couple of situations here. One way I can do is I can buy a business in another country and just convert that business into building my product, or I can form a whole new business in another country and use that as my subsidiary company to build my product. You see that a lot here along the Texas-Mexico border, where companies are moving from Texas and the U.S. are moving across the border to get lower labor rates on products. Now, two big issues: political risk. Every country on the face of the globe has a level of political risk, and you just have to know what those levels are and how politics play out in those countries. I know when I was in the business world, I spent a lot of time here trying to figure out exactly what were the politics of the country that I was in. What are the economic risks? What happens in these countries? How often do they change their currency, or how often do they devalue their currency, and what are the ups and downs here that I can expect, and what will that happen to the exchange rate, and how do I tackle that in terms of my agreement? All very complicated issues, but economic risk is almost as delicate as political risk, and you've got to understand what you're dealing with in every global situation. This is a good map. I like this map because it paints a really good picture. The green areas are the areas geographically where there's the least risk, and look where those occur. It's in North America and part of South America and in Europe. Now, let me also point out to Australia, South Africa. Mistakenly, we have Saudi Arabia and some of the Gulf countries shown there too. I would probably put them into the tan category if it were me. And then you have I believe that country there where Russia is Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. I may somebody can correct me on that. And then you see the European and Scandinavian countries. Those are all of the least risky countries to operate. Look where the marginal risk countries are. Well, let's see, they're in China, they're in North Africa. I'll give you a little geography test here. Where do you think? I mean, these are countries that have been in the headlines a lot lately. Where is Algeria? Well, follow the little cursor, and there is Algeria. Where is Mali, where we've got a fighting going on right now with the French and the Islamic terrorists? Right there is Mali. Look what it's close to. It's close to West Africa. These little countries located right along in here. Here are a couple of friends of the U.S., Morocco, right there, a friend of the U.S. And so, where is Libya? Well, listen, there's Libya right there. Where is Egypt? There's Egypt right there. And so you see all these countries that are in the headlines all the time, and you can see that. Well, there's China right there. So these are countries that are kind of moderately risky. The red countries are the countries where, boy, I would really question whether I'm going to operate in those countries or not. Guess which one of the biggest ones is? That's Russia right there. 11 time zones across there. We're all familiar with the U.S. with 4 time zones. That gives you a comparison of how big that country really is. Huge country. Here's Japan right here. Here is South Korea and North Korea right here, butting up to China. So these are in the geography of the world and the world markets, and the risk of operating in the world markets is extremely interesting. And if you're going to operate like that, you need to really know it. Here are some trade intermediaries that you can use if you're a small business trying to get overseas with your product. You can use a confirming house, which is basically a buying agent. It's a company that buys your product and resells it. You use an export management company that helps you export. You can use an export trading company that will help you to not only export but to move your company into outlets where you can sell. Export agents, merchants, or remarketeers, these are pretty common. In fact, most of the time when I was operating overseas in the business world, this is what I had right here, an agent who represented us in country. And then you can be a piggyback marketeer where you're piggybacking on somebody else's, local company's effort to market their product. So what are the challenges? Well, here's the challenges, and they are tremendous. Managerial limitations in product planning, marketing, finance, management, accounting, legal issues. Let's move back up that ladder. managerial limitations in the front office. The CEO doesn't really know for sure what he's getting into, but a lot of people want to go global without having a clue about the ups and downs and the risk involved in going global. Here's some helps that exist for us now. The SBA has various sources you can use for deciding if you want to get into international business or not. The ITA, International Trade Administration, part of the Department of Commerce, also has some helps for you. One best way to do it is talk to people who are either just coming back or people who are already operating in the country of interest for you. Or you can visit foreign countries. It's easy to hop on to some of these trade groups that are going to other countries as part of local chamber efforts. This happens all the time. So you can hop into one of those trade groups, trade visits, going over just to see what the trade possibilities might be, and if there are other companies over there that you might be able to partner with. I kept calling them trade groups, but really trade missions is a proper name for them. So this is a good way to get your foot in the door and get overseas and kind of get the lay of the land. To me, that would be a starting point, and then a lot of hard work over a long period of time would take place after that. This is important right here, dealing with banks in overseas business. You need to really understand what a letter of credit is. A letter of credit says that this is an agreement issued by a bank to honor a draft or other demand for payment when specified conditions are met. So what that means in practical terms is I'm getting ready to sell a product overseas, and I'm developing that product from scratch, or I'm building it from scratch, and it's complicated and expensive. Then if I do something like that and I have a customer overseas who wants the product, I'm going to make that customer sign a letter of credit as a part of my contract with them that says this. It's with a major bank in New York City. That's why New York City, by the way, one of the reasons it's the financial center of the world is there's major banks there who can handle letter of credits. And the way that operates is when my customer approves the system and I ship the system, I take a bill of lading to that bank and they pay me. So there's an agreement that bank, that letter of credit is an agreement with the paying customer that says when certain events happen here in the U.S. that indicate that system or that product has been shipped, then I will issue payment according to a pre-planned, a pre-agreed upon schedule to that shipping company. Very important concept. You need to learn that one pretty careful. Bill of lading simply says that's the certification that I shipped something. Another source of help with the financial assistance is the SBA. A lot of you guys are familiar with them already. Okay, that's our last chart, and we're going to move now into Unit 6, and we'll be covering Chapter 8, Chapter 15, Chapter 16. Another really heavy-duty heavy-duty unit for us. Unit 5, Unit 6 are the two that will be most stressful for us.